Hi, it's Kate McCurry here, also known as Macarac. This is a flip through of my 100-day project from 2024 of 100 different abstract compositions. I put them in this Coptic bound book, which I thought was a great idea, but didn't really hold up to the volume. And when I started off doing them, I was just doing them as like one at a time, trying to think of lots of layers and interesting compositions that I could come up with, in hopes that they would be something interesting that I'd want to do in a larger size eventually. When we get to 5, you can see it's a little bit different. There's no paint, it's just collage, same with 6, which is fun. And then 7, I did an abstract composition, didn't like it, cut it up, and then that's what I used there. These two I really like. I'm really experimenting with layers of paint and splatters on top to get different depth of opacity and transparency. And same with number 10. That's one of my favorite ones, actually. You can definitely tell, for me anyways, which ones are kind of flatter and which ones have more depth. I think by 12 I was kind of playing with watercolor as a top layer on top of acrylic, which is interesting. And then I also did a course with Jenny Nelson on movement, which was the black and white there. And these are more of my lots of layers with opacity and transparency worked in there. Definitely using a lot of blues and greens. I really like the pale colors. And then I said before, I did a free course with Jenny Nelson. These are the big sheets that I cut up into compositions, which were really interesting. So I wanted to try a few more from them. And the next one there is from a Nature's Fair magazine, just an image that I cut up to try and make an interesting composition. And then back to my one-offs. I was finding they were really similar at this point. Collage as well as paint layered on. And some splatters, which I definitely got more into as the project went on. There's one that's just collage, which I did a stop motion video, I believe, on Instagram. And then there's a few here where I started with an idea of what I wanted it to be and then moved on to make it more abstracted. And then 30 is another one where I made a composition, didn't like it, and then cut it up and tried to make it into something else. By the time I reached 31 was when I started doing master boards into miniseries. So I'd do a big sheet of 4 pieces and then cut it up and work on them to make them more interesting. And I really like how these ones turned out. I believe I kind of tried later on to make similar ones to that, but they really fail in comparison. So then 31 through 34 was one of the mini-series, and then 35 the next 4, which I ended up putting watercolor fussy cut leaves on top of, which was kind of interesting. And then added layer. And then the next mini-series starts at 39. I really like where that one went. I've got some Neocolor crayons in there, as well as the picture of daisies that I took and turned into black and white. And a lot of transparencies, dark values, light values, to try and make an interesting composition. Really like that blue paper. And then another mini-series. Really like the yellow in there. There's lots of transparency again. Lots of deli paper and tracing paper. In this one I used a napkin as well, which is that kind of starburst red color as a napkin. This one I thought was funny. I did not mean to make that a stem to the flower, but it ended up being that way, trying to mirror some of the shapes. And then I really like the adjacent papers on those, the napkin. I think that's an interesting look. And then this is a one-off of just collage. And then another mini-series where I used fussy cut watercolor leaves on top. Really like the colors in these. I think this was when I found like vellum sheets from Dollarama here in Canada, and they're like post-it notes, and I would take a white China marker and scribble on them and use them as a transparent layer. This is another one where I've just collaged. Really like that rectangles design. I've played with that in bigger pieces as well. For the 53 to 56 miniseries, I used a napkin again, but I think it was just a lot going on. There's a lot of color. It's a lot more complex. So I wasn't a fan of where that went. And you can see by 57, I tried to go with like fewer papers to make these compositions a little bit more simple. I was playing with those triangles again, which I did earlier and really liked. I like the pencil on top and the layers and the simplified colors. Playing with that adjacent pairing, which I like. And then thought it was a little too simple, so by the time I went to 61, I ended up using a lot again, and I think this was too many papers to make it more complicated. But still definitely elements that I like. I like the circles and scribbles in there, and how the leaf shapes are kind of continued on. By 65, again, I was thinking it was too complicated or too complex, so I went down to more simplified shapes and really focused on the circles of the octopus, tentacles, and then circles repeating through, also with that polka dot scrapbook paper. I use lots of rectangular shapes as well as some curves, and trying to balance light and dark values. By 69, I was using a picture I took again of some tansy weeds, I suppose, but I think they're beautiful. And I, again, like that, the adjacent placing of those dark values. And there's lots of curves that are repeated, which I also enjoy. And then 73 is the next miniseries. Definitely a lot of those curved shapes that are being repeated. With this one I made gel papers specifically for this project using homemade foam stamp on a jelly print of kind of Marimekko inspired flowers, which I really liked. 76 was the end of that last miniseries, the next one starting with 77, and this one I tried to use different colors, which I don't normally go for, that kind of burnt orange, brown, really liked with the blue, the contrast of the contrasting colors. And there's a lot of kind of beige layers and scribbles and things in there, which is interesting, and also some rust ink pages. 81's the next miniseries. This one has a black and white picture of a tomato plant from a genetics textbook, also chemistry textbook in there. Definitely use lots of discarded texts as my go-to papers to use. I like the circles and the different sizes in that one. 85 is another one where I went a little bit smaller this time. I think this has a lot of really small patterned pieces, so it needs a little bit bigger design to kind of move those in, but definitely, again, parts that I like. I love the splatters and ink pages that are in there. 89's the next one. Really like those yellow, goldy green color, and then turquoise. A little bit muted. Definitely some tissue paper ink drawings on top to add that transparency. And then again, I went back to the triangles on 93 to 96, but they went a little further than I needed to take them, so I'm not super in love with how those turned out. By the time I got to 97, I knew it was the last of the series, so I was really hoping to make it good, which is a terrible way to go into any project. Mostly I should just be playing and not thinking about how it should end up, but I did really like that fluorescent pink and green gold. And I made it to 100. There's lots of deep layers in there. My big takeaways were to keep my materials limited, definitely prefer papers that I've made versus store-bought, and to really focus on values. Definitely focus more on the lights than the darks, but lots to learn, and I look forward to doing this project again next year. And my poor book, Coptic Binding, did not survive this, but that's okay. So, see you next time. Bye-bye.